Hey guys, I'm all done grading your first reading responses. They were on the Tubin article titled Our Broken Constitution. So normally when we met in person, in all of my hybrid courses, I would have taken 20, even 30 minutes at the beginning of class the week after I graded your reading responses to go over them a little bit more, give you more in-depth feedback, and talk about things that you can improve upon going forward. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, the first thing I want to say is I don't want you to be discouraged by the fact that you may not have gotten the grade that you were anticipating or the grade that you were hoping for. The thing is writing is really hard. It's really tough. However, there's this misnomer, this misunderstanding amongst many of my students that writing is like a talent. Either you're born with it or you're not, and there's nothing you can really do about it. I just want to underline that that is absolutely not the case. If you are not a good writer right now, that doesn't mean that you can't be a good writer in the future. Writing is just like a muscle. If you never practiced basketball a day in your life, you had never even held a basketball, and you walked out onto the court and you tried to make 10 free throw shots in a row, you're going to miss every single one of them probably, right? You're not going to do well. So writing is just kind of like a sport. It requires practice, it requires strength and endurance, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. The reason I am so hardcore when it comes to reading responses is I want to make you guys better writers, and I want to prepare you for your future college courses because things are just going to get harder, not easier. Okay. So if you didn't get the grade that you were hoping for, don't worry about it. We're going to work on it. That's why I'm recording this video right now, to give you guys extra feedback on top of the feedback that I've already given you. So first things first, I may have made a note in your reading response comment section after I graded it that you should check out the good paper examples in the important course information module. You can find that module by clicking here from the homepage. See how it says important course information? And at the very top, you're going to see this module titled Important Course Material. Both of these PDFs right here are examples of reading responses that students have turned into me in the past that received very high marks. So these papers received like a 49 out of 50 or maybe even a 50 out of 50. The topic is not on Tubin's article, Our Broken Constitution. These papers, I believe both of them are from an article that I had students read in addition to a podcast that I had students listen to a few semesters ago that I don't assign anymore. But the structure, the format, so on and so forth, it's all the same. So if you're wondering what an A paper looks like, this is a great resource to check out. So let's talk about a few of the specific kinds of feedback I may have given you guys. Well, that's not the document that I wanted. Here we go. So a lot of you are writing your reading responses like you would write a blog post or maybe a diary entry. Your writing is simply too casual and it's not professional or academic enough, okay? So I wanted to give you an example of a statement that I read in a reading response that underlines this. So see here are the sentences. I personally think that two of the biggest failures in modern American politics is so on and so forth, right? So I personally, there are better ways to say that, right? One way that you can formalize this and make it sound less like a blog post entry or something that you might post on Facebook or Instagram is you could just get rid of this first part, right? And you could just say, the two of the biggest failures in modern American politics is so on and so forth. Okay. You want to avoid saying things like I feel, or I'm just not really quite sure, or I think Tubin has quite a few important things to say. Okay, you want to actually read your paper out loud and ask yourself, does this sound like a conversation I'm having with a family member or a friend, or does this sound like something that I would be comfortable presenting to my boss or comfortable presenting to my professor in front of a classroom full of college students? Okay, so this is honestly the hardest thing for me to teach you guys. Writing style, it's almost like picking up an accent, right? So you'd have to like spend time in the South in order to pick up a Southern draw, or you'd have to spend time in Australia to pick up an Australian accent. Well, there's almost like an accent that we use in academic writing, specific words, styles, phrases that are universal in the academic world. And so you want to do your best to sound like an academic. One way to improve your ability to write in a more professional academic style is to read that kind of stuff. So read more New York Times articles, read things from the New Yorker. That's where the Tubin article came from. Read things from the Wall Street Journal. You want to avoid whatever is being modeled for you on like Instagram or Facebook or on blogs, for instance. So hopefully you get kind of more what I mean by that. Okay, the second thing is on a lot of your papers, I may have made a note, I've commented that your argument wasn't very well articulated or it wasn't really compelling. That's probably because you just didn't think through your argument enough, right? So a lot of you guys argued that because African Americans, who many of which were enslaved, or women were not a part of the writing of the Constitution, or maybe they weren't allowed to vote at the time of the writing of the Constitution, that because of that, they shouldn't, because of that, that's one reason we could say the Constitution today is an illegitimate or undemocratic document, and it needs to be replaced. However, that argument doesn't make sense, right? Because the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendment are changes that we made to the Constitution that made up for this deficit in the Constitution. So the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 15th Amendment ensured that African Americans were able to vote. The 19th Amendment ensured that women were allowed to vote. So we could actually take that evidence and say, well, this is proof that the Constitution is working and continues to transcend time, okay? Another thing that I may have noted in your paper is you don't provide enough evidence for your argument. So you make an argument, but you make empirical claims about the world, but you don't actually give me evidence that this is true. So here's a statement that I read in one of your reading responses. This student wrote, they feared that if the general public, I think they're referring to the founding fathers, when they say they feared that if the general public was given a right to vote, they would interfere with government because the majority could not read and many were not educated. Americans today, on the other hand, are for the most part no longer as ignorant regarding political issues, and I believe they have earned the right to make or to have more of a voice when it comes down to the choices the government makes. Okay, here's the thing. If you are going to argue that Americans are more educated now, and as a result, they sort of deserve to be a part of political processes now, you need to prove to me that Americans are actually more educated, that they know more about our government now than they used to. So maybe you could find some stats on political knowledge and how that's improved over the last 50 years. Or you could look at literacy rates today compared to the late 1700s. So you need to follow this up with some piece of evidence that proves the claim that Americans are now more educated. Another thing that I noticed in your papers is a lot of you are still struggling with in-text citations. So remember, anytime you directly quote the text, whether it's the article that I assigned to you or it's the outside credible source that you found to complement your paper, and the article that I assigned, you need an in-text citation. You need to tell your reader where you got this information from. So, for instance, a lot of you guys, your paper just looked like this. You directly quoted Toobin. So this is coming from Our Broken Constitution. California has roughly 70 times more people than Wyoming. But where'd you get that information from? I see that you are directly quoting somebody, but you're not telling me where it came from. So that's why you need an in-text citation at the end here. Okay, so, okay, now I know this came from the Toobin article. And I could look at your bibliography, I could find that article myself, and I could double check that what you're telling me here is accurate. Okay, so a lot of you as well weren't formatting your in-text citation correctly. You want to make sure it goes author, year, and then in the case of the Toobin article, there weren't any page numbers, so that's why you don't see a page number here. But if there were page numbers, you would want to add, okay, I got this from page 5. All right, so you put a comma after the year and then page number and then parentheses. All of this goes before you actually end the sentence with a period. Last thing is, I still read a lot of introductions and thesis statements that were really vague and unspecific. I think I told you guys this before, but I want to reiterate it again, that your professors in the future are not going to read every single word of your paper. They're gonna read the first couple paragraphs, and with that, they're going to judge your paper from there on out. In other words, your first paragraph, your introduction, is kind of like your first impression. And if you make a bad first impression, it's really difficult to change the grader's mind from there on out. That's why your introduction and your thesis need to actually be the best part of your paper, the most thoroughly written, the most specific, detailed statements you can possibly write in just a short paragraph. So here's an example of 2 sentences that I read in an introduction. Okay. However, some people may argue that the Constitution is allowing corrupt actions to occur. In this essay, I will argue why this statement can be viewed as wrong and provide evidence for such reasoning. Notice that if I just read this thesis statement, I would have no idea what your paper is about, what you're referring to, what you're even talking about. Okay, so instead, you could write something like this. In this essay, I will argue that the Constitution enables corrupt behavior among our politicians. Specifically, the Constitution does not prevent politicians from taking bribes from interest groups. Okay, way more specific, right? Now I know what kind of corrupt behavior you're going to be talking about. I already know exactly what your argument is in the bulk of your paper in that second body paragraph, and I don't even have to read the second body paragraph to know where you're going with this, okay? So when you just say corruption, well, what do you mean by corruption? Like, who exactly is corrupt? And what role does the Constitution play in this? So you want to write out a thesis statement as detailed and specific as possible. Okay, Hope this helps, guys. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out to me if you do.